Live. I forgot
Okay.
the time. Hello and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 15th episode of PsyTalks with Psychologists, and I'm your host, Ms. Vasha, director at iChess. And we have with us today Mr. Jimmy Modi. He's a psychologist, and he's going to talk about psychoanalysis and how to work around with it. And those of who all are watching, you can definitely ask your questions in the comment section, and we'll surely answer them. And you can also start a watch party on Facebook so that your friends and family can benefit out of it. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction about Jimmy. He's a doctor, and he's a practicing psychoanalytical therapist and a clinical hypnotherapist. He's also a certified practitioner of past life regression therapy, transpersonal regression therapy, and CBT. He's been practicing in Mumbai for more than 20 years. He's also established as a spiritual counselor, author, and a public speaker. He's registered with the Indian Board of Alternative Medicine, American Hypnosis Association, and with International Association of Clinical Hypnotherapy. He has authored several papers which has been published in International Journal of Clinical and Experimental Psychology, the International Journal of Clinical Epigenetics, and Scriptomenics also is an international journal published out of Brazil. He's also authored two books, which is Journey Beyond and Celebrating Differences, which is Wisdom Through Relationships. So we'd like to welcome Jimmy. Jimmy, welcome to our episode of Psych Talks with Psychologists on psychoanalysis.
Thank you, Ms. Ba. Thank you for the invitation.
Right. So Jimmy,
About
if you could just quickly tell us about yourself.
about myself, I started this whole ball rolling about 21 years back. I don't remember when I started
Wow.
training in psychoanalysis. Uh, Training in psychoanalysis, at that time, there was no one training anyone in any therapy in Bombay, perhaps in India. And the first
Mm-hmm.
group of psychoanalytical training students and teachers began. And I was in the first batch of about 7 or 8 students. My
Mm-hmm.
teacher was, I felt, a very gifted psychoanalytical trainer, and I learned a lot from him. Um, Psychoanalysis benefited me in many ways through all the various other trainings that I did. And I'll explain to you how, when that question arises, I think it's one of the questions that I'm supposed to be
Yes.
asked.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead with the question. So, since our topic is psychoanalysis, can you tell us, Jimmy, what is psychoanalysis for everybody to understand? Because there will be audience which would be non-psychology background also, but there are mostly psychology background people. So, if you could just brief us on that.
Well, psychoanalysis started a long, long time ago. It was possibly the first psychological therapy to start. It started before World War II, started by Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was a neurophysiologist, a neurologist. He was not a
Right.
psychologist or a psychiatrist. And he was faced with the problem of people coming from the war with trauma. And he used a variety of therapies that he experimented with, which included hypnotherapy and which included immersing the people with trauma in hot and cold water therapy, whatever that was called. Okay. None of these seemed to work properly. He was not satisfied with any of them. And because of his dissatisfaction with these two therapies, he developed a therapy of his own, which he called psychoanalysis. In psychoanalysis, what he was really dealing with was with the unconscious mind, more or less entirely with unconscious mind and unconscious fantasies. And so, therefore,
Mm.
he developed what later became known as the drive theory, which looked at how our instincts and our sexual desires create our psyche. Okay.
Mhm.
Uh, Psychoanalysis, however, progressed from Sigmund Freud to other people who were his students and his patients also. And it branched off. There was a dispute, a conflict in psychoanalytical circles between his daughter Anna Freud and her theories on the one hand, and another great psychoanalyst, Melanie Klein, and her theories on the other hand. And in somewhere, I think it was 1944, the two decided to make amends, and both theories were allowed to exist side by side. Since it was in all about the unconscious mind and unconscious fantasy, there was really no way to actually measure the effectiveness of psychoanalysis. It did not
Mm.
stand up to scientific rigor. So, a psychoanalyst by the name of Bowlby was very dissatisfied with this aspect of psychoanalysis. And so he started something, he diverted and he started something called the attachment theory, which focused on behavior rather than unconscious fantasy. And from there, from Bowlby, the attachment theorists, the ethologists, ethological theory of attachment, and all the other forms of attachment theorists began and developed. We won't go into that because we are now really talking more about psychoanalysis. And we
Yes.
can
So,
spend the whole day talking about psychoanalysis.
absolutely. So, thank you for an introduction to psychoanalysis. So, Jimmy, what would be the primary or preliminary concepts of psychoanalysis, and how are they different from other therapeutic approach?
So they're different from all other therapeutic approaches because psychoanalysis is basically intrinsically all about unconscious fantasy. It's not about
Mhm.
behavior. In fact, hardcore psychoanalysts look down on the behaviorists. Okay?
Okay.
Uh, and I remember my teacher trainer who trained me in psychoanalysis would always scold me because I was always looking for empirical evidence of this and empirical evidence of that. And he would say, don't go by that. Go by what you see. Go by what you observe. Can you observe emotions? This was his question. Can you observe the unconscious mind? That's a hell of a question to ask. Can
Yes.
anyone observe the unconscious mind? Can anyone observe anything or even something that is unconscious? Your own mind or someone else's mind? So psychoanalysis focus was over there. And in that way it was different from all the other therapists. And a lot of the other therapies that evolved, schools of therapies that evolved from psychoanalysts who were breaking away from psychoanalysis to find an easier way of doing psychotherapy, a shortcut way or a measurable way.
Okay. Okay. So, Jimmy, what would be the, as I earlier, one question was that what would be the preliminary concepts in psychoanalysis? So, just it's only about the sexual desires, or is there anything else also that is being used?
Well, don't want to go into the desires and the instincts part of it too much, but
Right.
uh, people like Melanie, the early psychoanalysts like Melanie Klein, Fairburn,
Mm. Mm.
developed from psychoanalysis a branch of
Mm.
psychoanalytical thinking called object relations theory.
Mm.
This I
Mm.
found very fascinating.
Okay.
Uh, in simple terms, a newborn child is brought to his mother for the first time. He does not see the whole mother. In fact, all he or she sees is the mother's nipple of one breast. And he relates only to that nipple. And what his relationship with that nipple is determined by how yielding, nurturing, sustaining that nipple proves to be. So if that nipple is yielding, nurturing, sustaining, the child might think, this is a good nipple. But the mother can't keep feeding the child on one nipple, so it changes to the other nipple. Here the child experiences something new, a new nipple. And for the first time in our lives, for the first time in the child's life, the child is faced with trying to make up its mind between which is the good nipple and which is the bad nipple. So discrimination between good and bad begins literally on the first day of birth.
Okay.
And we begin to divide and split our entire world. And by doing that, we split our entire psyche into good parts and bad parts.
Hmm.
Now, even today as adults, but especially as children, we don't like the good parts. We don't like the bad parts. So we project out the bad parts into the
Hmm.
mother. And the
Right.
mother receives the bad parts and unconsciously receives the bad parts. And if one of the bad parts has to do with fear, for example, the mother begins to feel anxiety also. Okay? If the mother is able to hold on to that anxiety, to contain it, the child is able to learn how to contain its feelings and hold them together. And the beginnings of uh, integration and resilience begin. So the child slowly starts learning that this is not the whole mother. There's more to the mother. There's another nipple, there's another breast, there's an abdomen, there's a whole body. And not just that, but there's something called love. There's a mother's mind, personality. So slowly, slowly, all of these parts, objects of the mother, begin to come together and integrate to form in the child's mind the whole mother. Now, as a joke, if I may be permitted one, I
Oh,
wrote a
sure,
paper.
sure.
I wrote a paper which I published somewhere, and I also spoke about at Time and Talents, which was attended to by only women. And
Okay.
the title of the talk was How Men See Women. And I said, Jimmy, what are you doing? You're going to get tomatoes thrown at you. You're going to get questions. You're spreading fire over here. But they were very, very interested, very interactive, and very good audience. Basically, the talk was about how men tend to objectify women. And
Okay.
I used to remember hearing this, standing around the college quadrangle at Xavier's and hearing my friends about the girls that walked by. Hey, yaar, look at her. She's got such big tits, man. No, yeah, I don't like women with big tits. I like flat-chested women. Look at those, and this is an expression that's remained in my mind since then. Look at those baby-bearing hips. I said, wow, I've never heard of such an expression, baby-bearing hips. But here it was men, young men, fixating on a particular part of a woman only. That's all he could see, that's all he could appreciate. And later on, when I studied and learned object relations theory, I thought about this, I remembered this, and I said to myself, geez, what a tragedy, what a great human tragedy that so many of us men have not learned to appreciate the full woman and all that she comprises of. Okay? So what happens? A man sees a woman wandering around in that industrial park near him, I forget what it's called, and he catches her and he rapes her. Okay? Rape is what? It's just a man's obsession with a particular part of a woman's body. Look at all that he is missing out on. It's such a great human tragedy. Well, anyway, that was object relations theory, and containment was another great thing I learned, where two principles were there. Winnicott was a psychoanalyst who propounded something called holding, which is a way of the adult helps a child hold its feelings together, hold its ego together, not fragment. And children within themselves, and therefore a lot of us adults within ourselves, develop the organization, the mechanics, or whatever you want to call it, within us to contain feelings, criticisms, fights, arguments, threats, and that we are now in other psychotherapist circles calling resilience.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that resilience work? Psychoanalysis explains it beautifully. So there are a lot of
Okay.
theories in psychoanalysis. I don't want to make this a theory seminar. I would suggest you read a book on it or the internet.
Right. So, Jimmy, let's just quickly say hi to everybody who's there online watching us and would be
Hi,
ready with
everybody.
and would have some questions for you, which I'll be surely taking up. So, yes, hi everyone, welcome, and do shoot your questions. We have an interesting topic, uh, and Jimmy's here to put light on it. So, Jimmy, there's one question which is: does hypno work with those suffering with clinical depression?
Does what? Sorry.
So I think he meant is this Mustafa. He was meant that does hypnosis or hypno works with people who suffer from major clinical depression.
Well, by and large, whatever training I went through in hypnosis, hypnotherapy, depression was one thing I was told to stay away from in hypnotherapy because it could take the mind further, deeper into a depressive state. To today, I'm much more experienced in hypnotherapy and other therapies. Uh, I wouldn't advise somebody who's not experienced to try and handle depression, but handling depression would require a very great understanding of the kind of suggestions that you'd have to craft to bring the person out of depression. And it would have to be a step by step thing. You couldn't just straight go into it and say, now, you know, you're under, and I'm saying life is beautiful, you're happy. These kind of suggestions may bounce. But instead, to go step by step, which you can only do if you take a very specific uh, detailed recording of your talk sessions with him and understand what he is doing to himself. So a lot of people go into depression because of what they are doing to themselves, because of the negative talk that they're doing to themselves. And here I think CBT works beautifully.
Okay.
And I use a lot of CBT here very successfully.
Okay. So there's one more question, Jimmy, which is: can we use practice of psychoanalysis? Can we only use psychoanalysis practice nowadays? So I think that's what she meant, that only psychoanalysis as a therapy can you use in current times.
You can use it in current times. It is being used in current times. In
Mm-hmm.
Bombay, they finally started an affiliation with the International Psychoanalytical Association, an
Mm-hmm.
organization in Bombay called PTRC, which is doing training and all kinds of things in psychoanalysis. They have a lot of numbers of about 400 people that attend uh, their ranks. And yes, can be done today. How successful it is, I'm not sure because I've been out of mainstream of psychoanalysis for some time now. There's a lot of history behind that, and I don't know whether you would like to hear that history or not, but I've been out of the mainstream of psychoanalysis for now many years. And I'm fortunate that I went through psychoanalysis training because it has provided me with a lot of skills which no other training provides you with.
Absolutely. Jimmy, there's one more question, which is how to decide between psychoanalysis and REBT while working with clients. I suppose that's what Aditi is meaning to ask.
Okay. Well, Aditi, I can only tell you that, uh, what can I tell you? I use both, but I don't do one and then the other and then one and then the other. It's not structured that way. I'm trained in psychoanalysis. I can't help using that skill, using that training. That training helps me to see some things in the person in front of me, which if I was only trained in REBT, I would not be able to see. I
Okay.
can use REBT then to make the therapy part of the session happen. So if you have psychoanalysis, it gives you an understanding of things which REBT doesn't. And if you have REBT, it gives you the tools to work with a patient much more efficiently, quickly than psychoanalysis does. Psychoanalysis is a painfully long, yet very, very intensive process.
Okay. I'm sure, Aditi, that answers your question. And Manisha, I think he's using CBT. That's what he said
Mm.
currently. Also, there's a question from Rashmi. She's asking how to get out of childhood sufferings evolved out of authoritative, uninvolved emotional parenting,
Okay.
and how to forget and forgive the parents. How to forget that and forgive the parents.
You're asking me a lot of questions. Okay.
Okay, we'll go with the first question. We'll go with the first question. So, how
Uh,
to get away with the childhood sufferings of uninvolved and unattending parents, authoritative parents?
See, today I like to deal with childhood suffering the more easier way.
Hmm.
I use something called inner child work,
Yes,
which is actually a part of a larger therapy called ego states therapy.
yes,
It's very effective. You don't even need to go through classical hypnosis inductions. You can go straight into inner child regression. Uh, Psychoanalysis, my psychoanalyst, I don't know about psychoanalysis as a whole, what it teaches other psychoanalysts, but what my psychoanalyst taught me, which was a great, great, great lesson with respect to regression, because regression is a very big thing in psychoanalysis,
yes,
was our concern over the past is only to observe, to see how the patient, in India we call them patients still, how the patient uses the past in his or her present moment.
right.
That is what is important. What actually happened in the past, what the feelings were in the past, what the story of the past was, is all sideline. What is more
Mm-hmm.
important is how do you use your past in the present moment? How are you consciously and unconsciously using your past in your present moment? This is
Right.
what we have as psychoanalysts been trained to observe, to see. The name psychoanalysis, unfortunately, is a misleading name because there's actually not much analysis per se involved in psychoanalysis. The main backbone of psychoanalytic training, according to me, is learning to observe the emotions, learning to observe the unconscious mind, not just of the patient, but yourself as well. And learning to observe something which no other therapy really talks about today, which is called the transference and the counter transference.
Yes.
And that is almost magical if you can learn to observe the transference and the counter transference. It gives you so much deep inside information from that patient's psyche and unconscious mind. That's amazing.
Right. So, people, Jimmy, those who have, say, the question that she had explained, asked, with respect to how to get, how to forget and forgive these parents, or these, how do these kind of children or these kind of adults deal with the parents then? What do they do? Or what would be your process of working with them?
The parents are still alive. So I've
I
got
am
several patients where the parents are still alive, or at least one of them are still alive. The problem one is still alive. The good ones, unfortunately, go. The problem ones remain. Uh,
okay.
the
That's a
first
nice
thing,
way.
the first thing we must all deeply, deeply understand and realize, and the longer we take to realize it, the more pain we'll have to experience, is that you cannot change someone else.
True.
You cannot change someone else. You can only change yourself. And if you're in a relationship with someone else and that relationship is painful to you, you can relieve yourself of that pain by developing your resilience, by developing and changing your way in such a way that you don't have to interpret, receive what that person hands out to you in the way you have been doing. You have to change. So if you change yourself, whose bottom line improves? Your
Our
own. Therefore, it's always a benefit to you to change yourself. In this way, I found psychoanalysis almost a deeply spiritual exercise. It was like developing consciousness, changing yourself, growing your consciousness, expanding your mind. Okay? And I found it very fascinating to learn how these processes worked. Okay? When you are facing someone who, like a mother who is uh, very abusive, can you observe the mother, or can you only observe the abusiveness of the mother? What do you see in your mother? All along, there's a pattern that is repeating. Whenever a pattern repeats in your life, it only means one thing. It means that you are due for a change and you are not changing. And if you keep applying the same principles and therapies, they'll keep bouncing and the pattern will go on repeating. So every time a pattern is repeating, please understand this is the reason why. So something you need to change, something about life that you need to learn. Can you learn about life if you're not in a relationship with anyone? Not really. The greatest value of relationships today is it presents you with greatest challenges and prospects of self growth and self learning. So, if you have a mother that is like that, what part of the mother do you see? Only the abusiveness, only the hurt, only the way she puts you down, embarrasses you in front of people, nags you, scolds you. And that's all you remember about your mother from your younger days. But then, if you are asked this very awkward question, okay, are you saying that your mother has never done anything good for you in your life? You've never had any good moments with your mother? You've never enjoyed any good moments with your mother? You've never felt loved by your mother ever? I've never come across anyone who says they have never felt loved by their mother. But what happens to those memories? What do you do with the good memories? Why do you only entertain the bad memories? The bad
right.
memories makes the patterns repeat. The bad memories make you feel more and more miserable, more and more down, more and more crushed. Do you feel that you go for the bad memories because you have no choice?
Hmm.
Well, CBT has shown me ways to show my clients that they have a choice in the way they think and the
Okay.
cognitive distortions that exist over there. And I use exercises of CBT to show them that. And they say, oh, we never thought of that. So now, can you think of good memories with your mother?
Hmm.
Yesterday, I had a client just like this, whose mother was really abusive to her since childhood, abusive to the servants, difficult to manage in the house. I asked her, what would happen if you went up and hugged your mother? She says, oh, I don't know whether I can do that. I've never hugged her. You never hugged your mother? Why don't you try hugging your mother? You think she doesn't want to be loved by you? You think she doesn't want your attention ever? No, I know she wants it. But how can I give it to her now after all this? Well, then there's something in you that you have to change, isn't there?
Yes.
It takes two hands to clap. And if you can learn and grow from it, what else do you want in life?
I think it makes sense.
Makes sense, no?
Absolutely.
Good.
So, Jimmy, there's one more question by Suryakant. He's asking, how many sessions does psychoanalysis generally require to help a client?
Oh dear. This is the $1,000,000 question. Uh, Let me put it to you like this. Let me give you a little history. During the war years, it was mandatory what was called the psychoanalytical setting, which, amongst other things, included that the patient had to come and see you 5 times a week.
Oh,
And this would go on for years. It was a very, very, very extremely intensive process. And psychoanalysts hate hypnotherapists and hypnosis because they say this is too suggestive, too manipulative. But all the psychoanalysts who say this don't realize the manipulations and the actual subliminal hypnosis that they engage in themselves. Because psychoanalysis setting banks on creating a repetitive setting. And as you know, the law of repetition is one of the laws of suggestibility,
right.
right? But tell a psychoanalyst that and he say, oh, no, 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 we don't engage in such things. And we poo-poo all hypnotherapists. Well, I was so annoyed with them at that time that just to spite them, I went into hypnotherapy training. So to answer that question, after the war years, psychoanalysis popularity came down, became less. And in the US, it almost completely disappeared because the major insurance companies refused to insure psychoanalysis as a therapy because it cost so much, it went on for so long, and it was not measurable in its efficacy. So even today, I don't think any insurance companies will offer you insurance if you want to go for psychoanalysis. How many people will go for psychoanalysis in such a case? Well, they do now. There's a couple of big institutions of psychoanalysis in the US and in the world. And it's become a growing body. But it has had this problem where if you come to a psychoanalyst every day, today it's not that much. Uh, Today you need to see a psychoanalyst 3 times a week at least. So if you go, the setting is that you have to lie down, is a typical cartoon picture of the shrink sitting behind, out of eyesight view of the patient who lies down. This creates certain complications as well as creates certain advantages to enable the person to go deep into his psyche. And very deep he goes. And that's how you start learning to observe the unconscious mind. It's a vast arena you're entering over here.
Okay. Yeah. I think we have a clarity on how the process of psychoanalysis works, a therapy of psychoanalysis. Um, there is one more question by Mehak, and she is asking, my question is, how is dream analysis effective?
Oh, dream analysis is very effective, and psychoanalysts are very strong in dream analysis. Sigmund Freud was very strong in dream analysis. And many of the dreams of his patients are worth reading to understand the internal symbolism and metaphors that actually have been used in dreams. And in psychoanalysis, we clearly, and I think also in hypnotherapy, we clearly distinguish between a dream and a vision.
Yes, we do.
Uh, I did not like the hypnotherapy of dream work, the dream work of hypnotherapy, because it broke the night up into 3 parts and 3 different types of dreams, uh,
Yes.
and tried to analyze it on that basis. I found that very limiting. I found no evidence to support that kind of thinking. And I felt that what was more important, and psychoanalysis teaches me this, is that you can't just, you get these books on dream analysis and you think you can just open it and get a dream and analyze. It doesn't work like that. You have to know intimately the context of the patient's life, the patient's inner
Right.
life, what the patient is going through. And then when the dream comes out, it just makes so much sense. It falls into place. And it's so hard hitting and true.
Yes. Makes sense. You're saying something, Jimmy?
Sorry?
I thought you were saying something. So, Jimmy,
No.
there's one more question. Gayatri is asking, does psychoanalysis help in dealing with personality disorder?
With personality disorder,
Yeah.
yes, of course, it would help with personality disorder. But psychoanalysis does not, psychoanalysts, at least the ones that I was exposed to, are totally against things like clinical testing and labeling of different things, different forms of psychosis or neurosis. We've got psychosis, which is the hard headed version, and we've got neurosis, which is what nearly everybody is supposed to have. Okay? And we try to work through these two kind of storms. Borderline personality disorders and other things like that, they have developed, there are certain personalities, there are certain therapies that have specifically been developed, especially for borderline personality disorder, by a lady who herself suffered borderline personality disorder. And it's very interesting to read a biography. And the therapy that is being used for borderline personality disorder is something called dialectic behavior therapy, DBT, which takes
Mm.
from CBT and adds a Eastern perspective of mindfulness training to it, which
Mm.
is very good. Okay, so personality disorders, borderline personality disorders, uh, very effective therapy for that, proven to be effective, is DBT.
Okay. I think that's excellent. So, Jimmy, as a practicing psychologist, how important it is for other psychologists to practice psychoanalysis?
Uh, I would say that it is very, very important for all psychologists, all psychotherapists to do the 2 years observation training of the Tavistock observation course, which is the start of psychoanalytical training in the UK and the start of psychoanalytical training in Bombay. I don't know how good their 2 years observation course is, but learning to observe is what they teach you, and they really, really ingrain it into you. And I think that proved to me to be invaluable. Even when I was sitting in Yuvraj Kapadia's class or Sunny Saturn's class, I could see things which that were happening there amongst others, amongst Sunny Saturn or Yuvraj Kapadia, that others could not see because I was just trained to see. In fact, whether you're a psychoanalyst, a psychotherapist, a brain surgeon, a policeman, or Narendra Modi, I would recommend the psychoanalytical observation training of the Tavistock Clinic.
Okay.
Whatever you do, that training is invaluable. And
Okay.
the beautiful thing about that training, which I want to emphasize here to everybody, is in our spiritual traditions, we all hear about being in the now, being present, the power of, what was that book? The
Conscious mind.
power of the present,
Power of the present. Okay. So I thought subconscious
power
mind.
of the
Okay.
now. Okay.
Mhm.
But you can only observe in the now. You cannot do any observations of the past or the future. You can only observe what's happening in the present moment. So even if you don't go in for psychoanalysis, even if you just walk out of here today or tomorrow, determined to focus on developing your mind in terms of learning to see the difference minute by minute between assumptions and observations. How much of your life is based on assumptions? How much of
Oh,
your
totally.
communication is based on assumptions? And therefore, generalizations, because and every assumption is a generalization. It's not
Right.
in the now. Okay, assumption always starts with you always do this, you are always like that. But what is happening in the present moment? That's more important, isn't it? Can you see
Yes.
what's happening in the present moment if your head is full of assumptions? No, you cannot. So remove the assumptions and start practicing seeing in the present moment, observing in the present moment.
Very well put across, Jimmy. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Good, I hope
Uh,
people will practice that.
yes. The other question, as a practicing psychologist, do you think there are limitations to, the psychoanalysis work and with respect to the psychological state of the client?
There are limitations. To what extent they have been overcome, I can't say because that would depend on the constant developments in psychoanalytical practice that is taking place. For instance, I get people who are suffering from OCD. I don't see psychoanalysis being able to effectively deal with OCD. Okay.
Okay.
There are a number of things like that that psychoanalysis would be woefully inadequate to deal with. Also, CBT has a much more ready, rough and ready measure of dealing with helping the patient to deal with his life than psychoanalysis does. Even though
Okay.
CBT does not go as deep into the patient's psyche as psychoanalysis does.
Hmm. So,
So
as a
it has its limitations.
okay. So, while working with a patient, does the psychological state of the patient become a hindrance? Can that be a limitation?
See, this is a very funny question. Uh, Look, let's face it, we are in the business of dealing with the psychological state of the patient.
Yes.
Let's put it this way. We're in the business, we're supposedly trained to deal with the psychological states of people. And if
Mm-hmm.
we cannot deal with the psychological states of people or the psychological states of patients, then we should take up another job, go into computer programming or politics. And this was
Okay.
one of my greatest browsers with psychoanalysts, because I've never seen so much politicking anywhere as I have seen and witnessed in the world of psychoanalysis.
Okay. So, Jimmy, any key challenges you might have faced while in your practice with psychoanalysis?
My greatest challenge
Mm-hmm.
uh, is dealing with other psychoanalysts.
Okay.
Okay, Um I really don't want to get into this. There's a lot of, uh, let's say, water under the bridge and dirt under the carpet over here.
Okay. So maybe you can just tell us that what are the other things that one should keep in mind while we are being practitioners of psychoanalysis?
The main thing you should keep in mind is what we talked about, learning how to observe how the patient brings the past constantly in the present. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
learning how to see and observe the patient without judging him, without
Okay.
making assumptions or generalizations. The bone, or whatever you call it, of judgmentalism that was in me was completely ironed out the very, very, very hard and harsh way through my psychoanalytical training, which was very intense and which lasted a total of about 4 to 5 years.
Wow.
Okay. So if you can learn to see somebody in a compassionate, empathetic way without labeling that person, regardless of whether that person is your husband, wife, boyfriend, or friend, mother or father, or patient, I think you'll gain from it. I think you'll
Yeah.
gain a lot
That.
from it.
Yes. Do you use psychoanalysis, as you just said that you can also use, besides the therapeutic setup, how does one use, or do you use psychoanalysis in your life?
When I was training in psychoanalysis, I faced a
Mm.
great problem with my wife and my son. They both accused me every time they were losing an argument. They accused me of being a psychoanalyst. And they said, stop trying to throw psychoanalysis at us. And sometimes I was guilty of even throwing psychoanalytical terms at them. So you cannot, the temptation of using psychoanalysis in everyday life is very great, so long as you don't use it blatantly. So long as what you use is learning how to observe people without judgment, without assumptions. If you train your mind to think and see in this way, then anything you do and everyone you deal with, you'll benefit in every relationship.
Absolutely, that does make. So, Jimmy, in what kind of cases would you, as like, recommend? First thing is psychoanalysis कर लो इनके साथ, मतलब use करो as a therapy.
See, I don't recommend psychoanalysis as a therapy purely for any case, because I don't
Okay.
use psychoanalysis as a therapy myself for any case. But I use my training in
Mhm.
psychoanalysis in every therapy I do. Even if it's
Okay.
hypnotherapy, I learn how to observe. I try and
Mm.
observe people. Even in CBT, I use my abilities to observe, my non judgmentalism, and other things And I learned to observe people. Uh, Also, just being able to sit there and listen to someone, even if you don't have 2 rupees worth of anything to say, might make that other person feel held together. And psychoanalysis explains this in terms of the holding theories of Winnicott and the containment theories of Wilfred Bion.
Mhm.
So I have used those in cases quite successfully.
Very well. Jimmy, there are a few questions from the audience. So Neetu has asked that what training can help a counselor to remove judgment cap from their head?
In
Just be
today's
frank.
day and age, I would suggest mindfulness training, being in the
Very
present, the power of the
yes.
now. You cannot judge someone if what. See, Krishnamurti first introduced this concept to me, and I was a great fan of his. He was my gateway into spiritual thinking. Okay? And he would ask people questions which would completely perplex them and confuse them. So he said, what happens when you see a tree? Can you actually see a tree without naming it, without calling it a tree even?
Mhm.
Can you just see it without saying, ah, this is a tree, or this is an apple tree, or this is a pretty tree? Can you just see it? And then he asked the question, is there a difference between the observer and the observed? So I would suggest you read Krishnamurti. He is a
Okay.
great one for learning the power of attention, the power of observation. Next, become aware, develop your own awareness of your attention and how it moves. What makes your attention move from this to that? Even if you're sitting listening to a performance, musical performance, a symphony orchestra, can you listen to the whole orchestra all at once? And the conductor? Is your attention on everything at once, or does it move from conductor to the drums, to the violinist, to this, to that, to the person sitting next door, to the nice legs of the one of the people in the band? And what is the cost of that moving attention? Here, mindfulness training helps to develop an
Very,
awareness of the here and now and the movements in your attention.
yes. I'm sure that Neetu that answers your question. And Abha has asked that for self-awareness and understanding the present status with extensive psychoanalysis therapy is advisable.
Psychoanalysis is, I felt, for me, I can only speak from my point of view, one of the greatest trainings that I have received in the spiritual tradition of developing and observing myself. So even Krishnamurti talks of the observer and the observed and the observer watching the tree. Think about it this way. If you're seeing something, you can only see something if you are not identified with that something. I can only see Misbah because I am not Misbah. If I was Misbah, I would not be able to see Misbah. So when thoughts come in my head, do I become one with them? Or can I learn to see them? In which case, I'm seeing them like they're happening on a screen. I'm not a part of them. I'm not identified with them. I'm not attached to them. I can see them, they can come, and I can bring my mind back to my mindfulness exercise.
Absolutely. I'm sure that answers the question, Abha. And there's one more question from Suvarna. She's asking that can you tell us something about psychological therapies in brief? and especially the ones that you use?
All of them. There are about
Mhm.
100 different psychotherapies that have emerged.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
Then I suggest, I think, as Jimmy said, that you can first read up on that.
the most popular one today is cognitive behavior therapy, which came out of REBT from the
Mhm.
1950s. And cognitive behavior therapy is again another kind of therapy which should become a way of life for all of us. Freud came up with an amazing statement which he called reality testing. Well, we are
Mhm.
all consciously or unconsciously trying to test reality in some way and coming out with another version of reality which is as skewed, if not more skewed, than the earlier one. And one of the
Right.
oldest human practices is self evaluation, comparing ourselves, etc., etc. How do we evaluate ourselves? Well, this all requires clear thinking. But if you are not involved in learning how to think clearly, like cognitive behavior therapy suggests, then reality testing is going to be a far cry.
Mm.
And to develop that as
Okay.
part of you is a very good thing to do.
Yes. Um, Jimmy, there is one more question from Suryakant. If you could explain analysis of transference in brief.
Okay. Uh, See, when someone who is a patient comes and sits in front of you as a therapist or a psychoanalyst, the therapist or psychoanalysis analyst is not conscious usually of two things that immediately begin happening. In fact, this might even begin happening when the first person first speaks to you on the phone to take an appointment for therapy. Okay, that person is unconsciously putting on you a role that that person wants you to play for that person's life. So that is a transference. So a typical case was a young Gujarati girl who did not have a father from a very young age. She would come to see me, and I would begin to feel some kind of strange pull, myself being drawn to her, pulled to her. And I was wondering whether it's sexual. It felt sexual sometimes, but it went beyond sex. Then I began to see that what she wanted me to do was play the role of a father figure in her life. Now, when
Mm.
she put that transference on me, I needed to immediately become aware of its effect on me. Therefore, I needed to become aware of what we call the counter transference.
Mhm.
Okay, so she wanted to have a sexual relationship with a father figure also. So she would make me sometimes feel very horny. And if I was not aware of my countertransference, all would be lost. There would be no therapy. It would all go into a ditch. But because I became aware of my countertransference, I was able to work with the transference. I was able to work with her and show her at a very deep level what was happening in her and with her. And when she saw
Okay.
that, she began to grow and improve.
Mhm.
So that is transference and countertransference.
Okay. There's one more question before we are almost at the end of the session. So there's one more question from Abba. Watchfulness, being a witness with a bodily entity with self-consciousness in cosmic world may take us on a lightness and limitless journey. Is that a question, I suppose, or it's a statement?
I don't know what you feel about it. Uh,
Mm. Okay.
Consciousness can take you on any kind of a journey so long as you don't engage your imagination into it.
That's absolutely right way to put it across. There's one more question. In one session, can we use 2 to 3 therapies like CBT, art therapy, dream analysis? I'm sure that we can. What
I
are your
do.
thoughts on it? Yes,
I do. I do just that. And I've
yes,
wanted for some time to be able to address a group of counselors and therapists and train them to develop this kind of a perspective.
right.
I would love to be able to do that.
Hmm. Yeah. So yes, I think we are almost through the session, Jimmy, and
Okay.
thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your
Thank
valuable
you.
time and inputs. And I'm sure it was a very informative session for all of you, and I had a great time hosting him.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, everybody watching us, and I'm going to see you all tomorrow again at 4 o'clock. And tomorrow's topic we have is gestalt therapy. So yes, I'll see you all again. Have a nice evening. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jimmy, again, and
Thank you.
we'll see you. Yeah, bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye bye.
How do I come out of this?
You just need to, Jimmy, you can just close the window if you want.
Okay.